Well, this was a fascinating episode with Kevin Horn, the CEO of Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland. It all starts in South America, just a little bit different of a Mayberry that Kevin experienced growing up as he lived in places like Venezuela and Costa Rica. And this episode, beyond of where he grew up, is so interesting for this perspective as well. The leadership lessons that he will share with you today that he's learned. He studied some of the great leaders, Maxwell, Lencioni, and of course he has his own leadership experiences that he will talk about in this episode. For instance, how often do you hear how important it is to endure pain, the willingness to endure pain, and why that's important as a leader? And why he doesn't recommend being a my way or the highway kind of leader, because as he says, if your employees can't think, then why are they there? Why are they working for you? You're going to get a ton out of this episode with Kevin Horn, brought to you by, of course, the great producer Grace Dunbar on this episode of Leadership Lessons from Mayberry. Well, this Mayberry is going to be interesting when we talk with Kevin Horn of Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland, because you don't have the typical Mayberry that we always start with here in the last 15 shows. We're going to start there, Kevin. I can't wait to hear this. Tell me a little bit about your Mayberry growing up.
Yeah, so it is a little different than most, probably. I have in that space in the 60s and 70s, I lived overseas. And so my life really began in Costa Rica and San Jose when I was 6. And lived there in San Jose, and my parents at that particular time were learning Spanish. And so we lived there for a year, and then we moved to Venezuela, where I spent most of my growing up years.
And this is Amazon jungle, as you said to me, right? You're right around the Amazon.
Yeah, so we lived in the Estado Apure, which is kind of central southern Venezuela, and off a river called the Orinoco. And it's my parents worked with an Indian tribe called the Pume Indians. They were the Yarudos. And so, you know, the Amazon looks different depending on where you live. You know, we weren't actually living on the Amazon. You know, we were off the Orinoco, which is kind of a main tributary coming out. And it's really, that area is what I would call savanna. It's kind of like plains, and it has lots of rivers and cattle ranching. And this particular river that we lived off of, it was right in front of our house. In the dry season, it would totally dry up.
The river.
The river itself would totally dry up. And then in the winter, when the rains would come, it would immediately fill. Like you could hear it coming. And it would just fill. And so this was not like a small river. This was a huge river. And it would immediately fill. And of course, you know, so I grew up, you know, with dugout canoes and catching piranha and watching for alligators and, you know, visiting the Indians and their thatched roofs and their bow and arrows and their, you know, I still have a set at home of bow and arrows that they used, that they actually was part of their lifestyle. So I lived there just part of the time. I actually went to boarding school. So in western Venezuela, in a place called Rubio, in the state of Táchira, which is kind of western, up in the mountains. And so, which was, we had an airstrip at my parents' place. So we had a pilot that would come and pick us up at school. And then we kind of, even though I was only in second grade when we moved there, we would travel by airplane back home, and usually that was a couple day type deal. just because of the distance and just.
So this was not a little, get up in the air and land. You were flying
like all day, type thing. Yeah, like hours. And so anyway, I went to school there pretty much from second grade through my junior year in high school. My parents lived in different places. They worked with the Yarudos for a number of years, and then we moved to Colombia. My parents did. I always went to the same school, to Ocaña, which is kind of central Colombia. And then we also had a cattle ranch later on down in the Amazon on the Colombian side, which was rainforesty, which is, I think, what most people think of the Amazon.
Right.
Just humongous tall trees that would be the size of this studio, around in terms at the base, and so we could spend.
Well, I was like, where do I even start with? There's so many great stories that you've already thrown out. First off, let's go back to being a kid before we get to your boarding school.
Yeah.
I've got to imagine there was kind of intrigue around you at all times. You talk about alligators. You talk about piranha. What was it like, when you weren't at school? Did you go out and kick a ball around with other kids? Were you kind of on your own? And how'd you learn to fish? Tell me about some of those stories as a kid growing up.
So one of my piranha stories, catching piranha. So my dad had a boat. They called it a lancha, and really the use of it was to bring 50-gallon diesel barrels in from San Fernando because, of course, there's no electricity there. So we had our own generator.
No TV, anything like that, right?
No TV at all, even then. But so anyway, this lancha. So I would stand on the back of the lancha, and just use a piece of meat, a small piece of meat, hook it. Throw it in, and you'd have a piranha. So it wasn't.
Could you get in the water and swim then?
Yes.
Oh, and piranha would leave you alone?
Yeah, normally, the Indians, every once in a while, they would come because we had nurses that were at the station as well, and they, sometimes would have bites. But, in general, when it was rainy season and the river was full, there was less kind of a fear of actually, getting bitten. And, they were attracted by the blood and by the meat and by the smell and all of that. And, so the thing about piranha is you can't really, they're not really that great to eat. They have a lot of little bones. And so the Indians did have a method that they would use to eat them, but really what we would eat more often were something called bagre, which is, just basically big, huge catfish. And
you'd fish for those as well?
I didn't.
Yeah.
The Indians would actually not really fish for them in the sense that we think of fishing. They hunted them with bow and arrow. So they could see them. I don't know how they could see them. I could never see them, but they could see them, and they would shoot them with a bow and arrow in the more. So what happens when it rains like this, the river isn't just the channel like we think of. It's kind of like in Ashland, when it floods,
right?
What happens? It just spreads out everywhere and goes. But that's the way it is in the winter in the rainforest or in the Amazon. That's what happens to the river is it just gets huge.
Yeah.
And so they would shoot the bagre out in the plains area.
Yeah. So what took your parents there?
So my parents initially, my dad, we originally were going to go to Irian Jaya, which is kind of used to be called West Irian, which is kind of the Far East, but
right.
To work with some people in New Guinea. And my dad is a linguist. So he basically developed a written language or continued the process of developing a written language for this people group. So actually developing an alphabet. So that was part of what he did. and begin to actually develop, vocabulary and, a written form of language so that they could translate, anything into these people's language, especially the Bible. I mean, that's really what my parents were there for.
So was it missionary work?
It was.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was kind of our stint there with the Hurdados.
When you look back on that, did you know as a kid that, hey, there's no TV, there's other kids out here that are watching cartoons and they've got electricity and all of these things. Did you ever think of it, or was it a ball growing up in that kind of environment?
It was a lot of fun. I mean, so there's always, you can always find the difficulty, right?
Yeah.
In it. So there's always that, regardless of where you live. But yeah, I mean, so growing up, even when I was at boarding school, so there was always tons to do.
Yeah.
I mean, like when I was home on break, which was kind of like going to college, honestly. Only you're in second grade. So you're home for the summer. You have a fall break, you have Christmas break, so you have those breaks. And so when I was home, I'd plant a garden. So, that was something that I did growing up. So I had, I would, down in the Amazon, I would plant yucca, which is, I mean, I don't know how many people know what that is, but it's a root, and it's kind of like eating potatoes or whatever. Basically you just take a piece of the stalk of the plant and just stick it in the ground, and of course it rains a lot, right?
Right.
So no problem there. It just grows, and then when the roots get big enough, you just dig it up.
Yeah. So you had to learn to probably make sure that you were entertaining yourself, right?
Yes, for sure.
And were there kids in your village?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they were.
What were the games you played? I mean, we think to hear the Sandlaw football, right? Sandlaw baseball games. What? Or did you have games, or did you just go?
So I don't know so much that I played games with the Indians. So my dad had a routine. So the Hurdados were semi-nomadic, but this particular group of them had homes. They're, of course, thatched roof kind of things on poles, and they slept in hammocks and stuff. But there was a village, and so one of the things we used to do was we would just, go around and visit people. That was kind of one of the things that my dad did on a regular basis. So I would go with them, and of course, some of them spoke Spanish, but a lot of them did not. So there was really, for me, a limited ability to communicate, even though I spoke Spanish, learned Spanish when I was little. So limited ability really to communicate. So it was more my dad communicating and me just going around and visiting and smiling and, maybe eating some food or, just hanging out, when we were there.
Yeah. Educational experience. I mean, again, have to get on a plane, fly across to the other side of Venezuela and go to school.
Right.
It was an English-speaking school, I'm assuming.
It was.
Yeah.
It was called Christensen Academy. It was started in the early 1900s, and so we had about 100 students, first through 12th grade. And back in those days, they didn't have homeschooling. I mean, that wasn't really a thing back then. I think today probably those kids would be, and their parents would homeschool them. But in that day, that was the way that that they did stuff. So. So I don't remember what you're asking.
Well, I know you had mentioned that it was English speaking. And what was that educational experience like? Was it similar to what you would have received in a school system?
I think so. The only thing that I would say would be I came back for my senior year in high school, went to Broken Bow.
Yeah.
And I would say the difference was just the expectation level was really, really high. So, I mean, most of my high school classes were not, my college classes were not really much harder than my high school classes. Just the expectation level was really, really demanding.
So it wasn't just, was it the academic, rigor of it? It was just really profoundly difficult.
Very, very difficult.
Yeah. And, I think most people would not have thought that.
Okay.
So, right? Because you're thinking, in the United States, you're going to get this rigor much more so. But that had to be, was it challenging for you? Were you a good student?
I was not a good student in the sense that, in this sense. So school was always hard for me. I really, and I don't know how much of it had to do with the transition. I kind of struggled to learn to read, and so it took me a while to kind of get there. And then, I don't know, of course you don't have your parents, right?
Mm-hmm,
They're not there to help you. So you're kind of on your own. And I don't know that school necessarily came naturally to me, I wouldn't say. Pretty young, I would actually, like if I had a test, I would get up at 5 a.m. And study. At the dorm, they wouldn't let you stay up late. We had study hall, but that barely touched the amount of work that you had to do.
Right.
Yeah, that was a regular thing, but mostly it was outside of study hall that and getting up early and studying. And so the benefit that I received from all of that and the difficulty of it just developed a lot of tenacity in me and just, a willingness to work really hard. And so that really formed a lot of who I am as a person, because school did not come easily for me, and I had to really, really work hard.
Where did you get that discipline, Kevin? Because again, school didn't come easy for me, and I didn't necessarily work any harder at it. I just kind of muddled through.
Yeah.
School didn't come easy for you. And yet here you are, you're getting up at 5 o'clock, and that work ethic, of course, is being formed now that I know has helped you today.
Yeah.
What drove you? I mean, you've got two options. You can do the Tim route, where you're just like, I'll muddle through and take my C, or you can do the Kevin route, which is I'm going to put in extra hours. Where'd that come from?
Yeah. So there's something that in leadership we talk about, right? So we enter, right, into what we try, right? We try something. And then we fail, So then we have an option then to repeat, try and fail, right. And we never get anywhere.
Yeah.
So try, fail, learn, grow, re-enter, right? And so early on, I did a lot of failing in school.
Right.
Just not getting good grades. Not because I wasn't necessarily doing the work, just because I wasn't doing enough work. I wasn't working hard enough for what they were requesting, what they were demanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my dad, he would sit down with us, of course, after they'd get our grades, and, well, you need to work harder, And
so there was a partly perspiration that you were motivated to work harder, or was it inspiration?
I think I just wanted to do well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I wanted to do, so I had friends that I grew up with, they could spend a fraction of the time that I spent and get a better grade than I could get. Spending is, an extraordinary amount of time. So I think I just wanted to do well. I wanted to excel. And I got tired of getting C's and D's and having conversations with my parents and with the teachers and, saying, hey, you need to work harder. And I know it's not easy. And so it wasn't that they weren't willing to help, right? The teachers and so on and so forth. It just was, it wasn't easy for me. Yeah.
So you get to Battle Creek, and like I said, we could now easily spend 90 minutes just on your upbringing because it's what an intriguing upbringing.
Yeah.
But now you go to Battle Creek, Nebraska.
Broken Bow.
Oh, Broken Bow. Broken Bow, your senior year.
Came back from South America.
Tell me about what that was like culturally, to go from this strict boarding school that obviously,
Sure.
very
Sure.
strong academic rigor.
Sure.
Now you're in a public high school in Nebraska, not to mention just where you live, right?
Right.
I got to hear about this and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so a little bit, just to kind of to frame that up a little bit. My parents are from Broken Bow, and they had a ranch south of Broken Bow growing up, and so my parents sold some of the ranch earlier on, and then we had a dairy farm that we owned actually while we were living in South America, that somebody ran for us. And so when we would come back occasionally during the summers when I was in school in South America, and we had an extra house on the place, and so we would, live there. And so moving to Broken Bow wasn't totally foreign to me.
Got it.
I had kind of a frame of reference. Our extended family, on both my parents' side, are from Broken Bow, around that area. So I had all of that, of course, culture shock, and just the way you think about things, right, is different, so the things that maybe that you would take for granted. And maybe an example would be most kids in Broken Bow, probably by the time they're a senior in high school, have a car. Right? And so, nobody in my high school had a car, not even a motorcycle. I mean, we had bikes and we walked everywhere, and we lived in the mountains. So Rubio's in the mountains.
Right.
So we were always hiking and biking and doing all that kind of stuff. So just think of, the material things, I think, are the thing that maybe is a bit of the culture shock, right? Because TV, we didn't have a TV at boarding school,
right?
So just all of that side of things would be one thing that you could say, okay, well, that's really different.
Yeah. And did you become enamored with those things after not having them? Did you come back to America and live full time and go, wow, I'm going to watch a little TV?
Sure. You're intrigued by it, right? Because it's new, right? And different. And so we would go to my grandparents, when we were back here during the summer, and they lived on a farm north of Broken Bow, and we'd watch TV, and my mom would say, okay, you're out of here, no more TV for today, and so my grandma would put me on a lawnmower or something, and I'd go out and do that, or I'd go with my grandpa, or we'd go, check irrigation, or go, get on a horse and go check cows, or whatever. So, but you for sure, and so as a kid, you think, well, maybe I'm missing out, right? Yeah, maybe I'm missing out because I don't have all this stuff, and you don't necessarily have the perspective that we do now,
right?
Of understanding the value of the education that you did receive, and that maybe those other things really, in the whole grand scheme of things, probably aren't that important.
Yeah. Fascinating. And like I said, we can go on and on about this, but I want to get to obviously where you're at today and leading up to it. But before we do, when you look at, and of course, being a CEO of Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland, what do you think you still pull with you today that you learned in Venezuela and you learned in Costa Rica? What values kind of stay with you today that you think were ingrained back in those days?
Yeah, I think something that would be different, and I think anybody who lives overseas is very patriotic and is very grateful for this country, and just the opportunities that affords, and the lifestyle and the possibilities that you can have if you're willing to work hard, and you're willing to put in the effort, and you're willing to, So I would say that, one of the things is just a gratitude for the opportunities that are available here. Yeah. And then I think the other thing, just what we've talked about already, is just, had I grown up here in the States, I don't know that maybe my work ethic, especially as it relates to school, maybe would be different. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think some of that work ethic comes from just who my parents are, and just the fact that they, is so funny when you grow up without electricity and everything has to be made from scratch, and you have an outhouse.
Yeah.
And all of those things, everything takes so much time and energy and effort, and so when you grow up with that you realize that everything takes so much time, energy, and effort. That's really true about everything, right? Anything worthwhile.
Yeah.
Anything worthwhile is uphill all the way. Mm-hmm. So even like you doing this podcast, it doesn't just happen. This idea, you have this vision for what you're wanting to create, what you're wanting to do, how you're wanting to do it, the impact you're wanting to have. Well, that's uphill all the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's an excellent point. And, one of the things you said a moment ago when you said living overseas made you very patriotic because you see the opportunities, right, here in the United States of America. And it's so interesting because you've gone into banking, and the guest right before you talked about at age 15 getting a business loan from Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland to start his first business, which now he has thrived in the business industry. And you really can help with those opportunities. Yes. So it was a great fit. Was that a vision you had, or did you kind of stumble into the banking industry?
So I majored in agricultural economics with a ranch and farm management specialization. I had an uncle who owned some banks. So I was interested in that, and a lot of people that are ag econ majors do go that direction. I was initially an ag loan officer. So, but in terms of the actual vision for what community banking can really do, I think I've kind of gained it over time. I don't think I understood it from the beginning. Really what we want to do is help people achieve their dreams. It's about being a companion or a cheerleader or an assistant, or I'm not sure exactly what the right word would be, but the so fun thing is to watch somebody that starts, so I've been at the bank over 30 years, so a long time. So to start with them 30 years ago, right? And so they're starting their business, they're getting going, they're borrowing money, and sometimes a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They're doing well, but they're leveraged, because of their situation. They're making it work. They're having new ideas. They're adding, expanding, doing different things, and then they get to the place where they're no longer borrowing any money, and they have made it. They have reached their goals. They have paid off all their debt. They're making good money, and they're able to provide for themselves and for their families and be independent. And that is so cool, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to be at one place long enough to see that happen to people, that they actually they stick with it and they're successful. Yeah. And to be a partner in that, and to have a chance to see it is I think that whole thing is I think about what a lot of what community banking is about.
Yeah. And speaking of that and working hard, and that's the ultimate goal I know for you and as a banker is to see them get to that point of independence as well.
Yeah.
Hey, we're taking a little break in the show to make sure you know about Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland. Not many banks have been around for 139 years, but Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland has. And why? Because they offer full-service business banking, and you'll always speak to a live human being when you give them a call at Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland. They're commercial lenders. They are more than happy to share their expertise and to help you navigate any business financing that you may need, including SBA, TIF, or Nedco financing. So go to fmnb.com. Right below me, you're going to see that website, or give them a call at 402-944-3316. Member FDIC and equal housing lender. Listen, to get to be CEO of a small community bank at Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland, you wore a lot of different hats. I mean, you started out at Los Fresno State Bank, right? First bank in 1984. And you have wore about every hat that you can wear, right? Bookkeeping, VP of lending, VP of commercial lending. How did that experience, how much richer are you for that, to have those experiences to then ultimately move into a role of CEO?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things in community banking. Yeah, it's different than maybe, say, larger institutions. In community banking, you wear a lot of different hats. You know, you're not just able to maybe say just focus on one thing. So that process of starting, I mean, my first job, one of my first jobs in banking was filing checks. You know, that was back in the day when you used to get your checks back. So they had to be physically filed in file drawers, you know.
How did you survive that?
You know, so I knew I was a management trainee for First Bank. And so I knew that it wasn't a permanent position. And so I knew that it was just simply a process, right? And we used to have something called a proof machine. Now they just have scanners, you know, that do all of this stuff. But we had to encode every single item. Like we had to, you know, with a micker down at the bottom, you know, where the check account number is, that all had to be physically encoded so then it could be read through a, through a processor. But so all of that stuff, you know, and that could be a session on its own, just talking about all that stuff. But yeah, it all helps to understand, you know, what's going on in those areas today, or at least have compassion and sympathy and understanding for the employees that deal with that on a daily basis, and to offer, you know, encouragement and help where I can.
Leadership can kind of be a scary thing, an intimidating thing. But when you started in 1984 First Bank, did you have a vision at some point to say, I would love to be a CEO of a bank? Or, and if not, when did that vision kind of click for you that, look, I would be strong in a position of leadership, and this is where I ultimately want to go?
Yeah. So no, I would say no. I didn't think that. I mean, it may have been a passing thought, but it wasn't necessarily a driving force in my life, I would say, at the beginning. And, you know, my leadership journey, you know, maybe here I could just do an aside and just say, you know, anybody can be a leader if they're willing to pay the price of what it takes, right, to learn just some basic skills, you know. And the cool thing is that as a leader, you know, everybody wins when the leader gets better.
I love that quote, by the way.
Yeah, everybody wins when the leader gets better. And so for me, that journey really began probably in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, where there's something called the Global Leadership Summit, and that was kind of my introduction to guys like Patrick Lencioni and John Maxwell. Those guys, you know, were maybe ahead of their day, and you know, I mean, guys like John Maxwell, I mean, this guy, he actually visits with presidents, and they come into countries and try to change culture and develop leadership in around the globe. People invite them in, and Patrick Lencioni, what he's done just in terms of helping team culture and employee culture, and figuring out how in the world you have healthy team culture and work culture, and how you hire people and all of that kind of stuff. So this is all stuff I've learned.
Right.
Like, I didn't know this stuff when I started, and I didn't realize really, even though I started my own business when I was in second grade. Actually in first grade. I was mowing lawns in first grade.
Now, was this in South America?
Yeah. Oh. I was mowing the next door neighbor's lawn, and it was with one of those rotary old style.
No electricity, gas, or anything. Yeah. I remember those.
I don't know how in the world I could even do it in first grade, And then I had a candy business when I was in junior high and high school. And then I also, had a job, a paid job through grade school, planting trees and watering trees and all of that kind of stuff. So
it's amazing how many strong leaders have these, have put their hands into business and taken that risk, that challenge, and even the responsibility in first and second grade. It's a common thread. But I want to go back to when you started going to the Global Leadership Summit. Were you looking for something then? Was it, look, I know I need to be a better leader, I'm going to go to this? Was it curiosity? What was inspiring you or motivating you to start attending those?
Initially, I think it was just somebody saying, hey, you should come.
Okay.
This is going to be really helpful for you. Not really realizing what I was getting into.
Were you a good leader then?
I would say that I still needed a lot of work. I mean, my employees may say I still need a lot of work.
I've got an employee story I'm going to share with you about you later on, and I would say that is not how she feels. But go ahead.
Yeah. So I think there's just so much to learn, and I think a lot of times when you start out in business, you don't necessarily know what you don't know, and so just back to the Global Leadership Summit, I mean, it has been probably the single most thing that has changed my life, and not necessarily because I went, but because I took the information that they offered in terms of the speakers who are world class, so the presidents even come and they'll sometimes have them, interview them. The Global Leadership Summit was just held here recently, and Condoleezza Rice was one of the speakers. So the people that you're interacting with, you and I wouldn't necessarily rub shoulders with them on an everyday basis, but you have a chance to be exposed to people who have been very successful and have learned some things, right, about life and how to live it and how to lead. And so once you go and you see the value and you start trying to use some of this stuff, and then you do that little circle, try, fail, learn, grow, improve, and re-enter. And once you start doing that, and you think, oh, this stuff really works, and it changes the trajectory of my life and the people around me. Then you kind of get hooked, right? You say, okay, there's something to this, and I can be a leader. Maybe I didn't see myself in this role or in this way. But there's more out there that I can tap into, and that anybody can if they have the desire and the drive and the willingness to learn.
And that's the interesting point, because so often, we hear the old saying that leaders are born. But what I hear you saying is Yes, they are.
Right.
Because
yes.
everyone, if they're willing to put in that time and that effort,
yes,
can become
yes.
a better leader.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's the whole deal, right? I mean, that's the whole thing about, these people that spend their lives like John Maxwell, Patrick Lencioni, teaching on this stuff. I mean, why else would they do it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you and I weren't able to garner anything from what they had to offer, then they wouldn't be writing books and speaking and stuff. It's because of what they know and what they've figured out that works, and their ability to share that in a way that you and I can actually latch onto it and use it. And then we see, oh yeah, I mean, it's not just, it's really good stuff,
Mm-hmm. I think what's also interesting, you move into the role of CEO at Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland. And by the way, what year did that title fall upon
I was trying to figure out that. I don't know. I think it's been maybe about 10 years ago.
Yeah. So you get in that role, and now even more people report to you, right? You went from another leadership role into the CEO role. And you said something to me as we go back and forth on email to prepare for this, that the importance of leadership doesn't just fall to those folks that report you within the walls of Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland, but it also falls to your clients, right? To those folks coming into bank. And that story you told earlier about the responsibility of trying to help them achieve their goals. So again, a lot of business owners are watching this. They're only thinking of leadership in terms of how it affects their direct reports or within the walls of their business. Talk about the importance of utilizing that to your clients as well, and how they have to feel that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have a whiteboard in my office, which you've seen.
Yeah.
And so I'll have business leaders take a picture of it. The other day, somebody was in, and they were saying, "Oh, I was reading this book. It's about the 5 dysfunctions of a team by Patrick Lencioni." And so they see this, and they had been reading the book. And I don't know who told them about the book or why they were reading the book, other than they were trying to get better, right? And so they come into the office and we have a discussion, a 10-minute or a 15-minute discussion about it.
Yeah.
And so they're also, right? They're trying to figure out, how do we have a team? How do we hire people? How do we have a team that works, that actually is healthy, and that allows us to move the business forward. So it's also very important to them. And, I've done some consulting. I haven't had much time recently to do that, but in the past I have, just helping businesses, try to figure out what the next step is with what the difficulties that they're encountering, and we all have them, right?
Right. Oh, sure.
Yeah. So that's the other thing, that I think a lot of times people don't realize, in business. So the more responsibility you have, the greater the leadership role that you have. You really do have to be willing to endure pain.
Expand on that, because that the question, and the reason I want you to expand on that is the question I was going to ask Ness: why is leadership so difficult? We have resources, podcasts, books, Lencioni, Maxwell, everything at our fingertips, and yet it still seems to be, for a lot of folks, for many of us, right, that we're still searching. It's difficult, it's challenging. So talk about that last point, because that may hold the answer.
Yeah. So I think, it's so difficult because we are always encountering obstacles, right? So one of the things that I do is I have rental property. And so, that there's always obstacles, whether it's trying to take care of a tenant and treat them like you would want to be treated and deal with whatever issues that they have, or you're trying to buy another property, you're trying to make it cash flow, you're trying to figure out, how do I buy this, and what's the right price, and does it make sense? Is it gonna pay for itself, and all of that kind of stuff. So, or you at work, you have employees, and I don't know. I'm not perfect, so I don't think they are either. And so there are relational challenges There are interactional challenges that they have, that you have. Everybody brings what they got with them,
right?
And so, there's that learning. And so, trying to help people, whether they're employees or business people, trying to help them say, okay, here's some things that I need to work on. How can I work on this?
Mm-hmm.
How can I get better? And so it's, leadership is challenging on so many different levels. I think the thing that's different for me is when it comes to this kind of stuff, even though it's so difficult, I'm not discouraged by it.
Yeah.
I guess mostly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sure. That doesn't mean that there aren't hard days and there aren't discouraging things, right? Because we all face that, right, in our lives, but it doesn't make me want to quit. What it does is it makes me want to try to figure out, okay, what's the solution?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and
did I step on you there?
No, you're good. No, that's fine.
Because what got me thinking too a little bit is with Farmers and Merchants Bank of Ashland, meaning a smaller community. Not I don't want to call it a small bank because certainly you go way beyond Ashland. But on the other hand, there is that element of truly being in a smaller community, right?
Oh,
you know people's names and leadership playing such an important role. And this is not a knock on bigger banks, but sometimes a bank can get so big.
Sure.
You may not know Mabel coming through that front door, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So again, do you see that spilling down from your people, the folks that you're leading and role modeling for them leadership? How important is that, especially in that smaller type community setting?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, so, most every single customer has some kind of relationship some way with somebody in the bank. And so the people that we like to hire enjoy that, right? They enjoy that interaction. They enjoy being able to help and offer that customer service. And a lot of times, it's pretty relational. I mean, people know their lives and their customers' lives and what's going on with them, and it's caring about that, having compassion, for those things and trying to figure out. And it may not necessarily mean always approving the loan, right?
Yeah.
It may be, and it may not. You may not always be able to do what they're asking you to do, but it's maybe helping them to figure out how you can. Here are the things that we can do. So let's work on this, and if you work on these things, then come back in 6 months and let's talk about it again. So community banking is that way.
Right.
It's more hands-on, it's more personal, it's more relationship-based, especially I think, on the teller or the new accounts, the entry point that people have to the bank. Those people are people they see every day. And on the lending side, a lot of times, especially in commercial lending, these are businesses. So you see these people on a regular basis. You're talking to them. They're asking questions and, how can I do this? And what can you do to help me with this? And
I think that's what makes you guys so special, is that you do have that relationship.
Yeah.
And boy, that can be so helpful in so many ways.
Yeah.
And I want to dig in a little bit about how you got there when it comes to your leadership, because we've talked already about Lencioni being such a huge influence on you. And we won't go through the whole 5 dysfunctions.
Right.
But one thing that I thought was so interesting, and obviously I've been through the training as well, but you talk about fear conflict, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the rungs, if you will, of the 5 dysfunctions.
It's a big deal.
Right. Artificial harmony.
Yeah.
And the cure for that, courage to be open. I think this seems to be at the heart of a lot of problems, right?
Yeah.
Is that you give that artificial harmony.
Yeah.
And that can lead to bigger problems. And talk about that, because there's business owners out there all the time. And I work with some of them who say, I just hate conflict.
Yeah.
And they view it as conflict
versus
that willingness to be open. So talk about how they can get their arms around that as a business owner.
Yeah. So we have a management team meeting every Tuesday morning at the bank. And so we're making decisions about, right now we're in kind of software kind of renegotiation on stuff.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to figure out certain things, certain software. And so had our consultant in that's helping us with this. And so I go around and I said, okay, so I want each of you to tell me, if you had to vote today, who would you vote for? Which software company would you vote for? And so we just went around, and so the reason I tell the story is because afterwards, the consultant said to me, he said, I rarely see that ever happen in my business experience, where people actually can voice their opinion and tell you why they think what they, think. And mostly people don't always have to have their way. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily always have to have their way, but it is really important that they have their say. And what I mean by that is just that you hear them, mm-hmm. that you hear their input, that you value their input, that you try to figure out, okay, be curious. Like, okay, so why do you think that? And so there's I like to put it like on a line, like draw a line and say on one side there is like, healthy discussion, discourse, interaction, and on the other side there's personal attacks. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we talk about conflict on a linear line, and so over here is healthy, over here is personal attacks, right? So, well, the healthy piece is probably someplace in the middle, and we have to be careful, to be civil. Does that mean that I have always been civil? No. So I have, and my employees will testify to this, I have had to apologize, and say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have, did what I did. Will you forgive me? Let's get this back together. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem with conflict, right? So that's the 5 dysfunctions of a team, right? The fear of conflict. People don't want to go there, right? People don't want to have conflict because this discourse, because a lot of times it turns out not being civil, and I mean, I think there's a lot for us as a country, not just in business.
I was just going to say that could be taken to a whole new level, can it? It's funny how in business we do work so hard for civility, and then in other things outside mm-hmm. of business, we don't always pay attention to that.
Yeah.
And that's where those leadership lessons can stay with people.
Yeah. And so it's very, very important to be able to have that discussion, because that's where the best ideas mm-hmm. come out, right? Mm-hmm. Because if nobody can speak their mind, well, then you're not really taking advantage of what that person may have to offer.
Right.
Their insight, mm-hmm. their acumen, their ability, you're missing out on all of that. And so if you're not willing to go there, right?
Yeah.
If you're not willing to go there, then you have artificial harmony, and then a lot of times what happens from that, if you have artificial harmony in a business, is then people sabotage it from the other end, mm-hmm. right? So I, the CEO, said, we're going to do this, without getting buy-in from everybody. And then all of a sudden, nobody's really willing to work on it, right? Or half-heartedly, because they don't like it.
Yeah.
And they haven't had a chance to say their piece.
Yeah. And you're right. Artificial harmony stifles innovation. Mm-hmm. There's so many other negatives that can come with this. One other thing I want to ask you about here. You talked about key lessons in your life. And you talk about having a posture of humility. Uh-huh. And there's 3 things that really go with that. don't pretend, don't presume, don't push pull. I'd like you to expand on that a little bit, because Kevin, I'm going to give you a quote after this. You are a servant leader. There's no doubt about it. And I believe in the value of that. So I want to hear a little bit about that humility. Don't pretend, don't presume, and don't push pull, what that means.
Yeah. So humility, I mean, I think is one of the most indispensable character qualities of a leader. And the reason is because if you think you know everything and don't need anybody else's input, then people don't generally like that or aren't attracted to that. Mm-hmm. And you're not even really going to be successful.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
A leader might say, humility's weak. Servant leadership, that's soft, weak leadership. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think, so what works, right? What works? Okay, so you can be a leader that, says, okay, this is the way it is. It's the my way or the highway, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe it's kind of maybe what you're saying, my way or the highway. So let me just ask you, do you want to work for them?
Right. No, I would not.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some people.
And most people, don't you think most people want their opinions valued, their thoughts, their ideas?
What am I here for? What am I here for? Mm-hmm. If it's my way or the highway as the leader, what am I here for? Why do you need me? Mm-hmm. If I can't think, if I can't use my acumen, my ability, my experience, everything that I bring, why'd you hire me? Mm-hmm.
Tell me what don't push pull means.
Yeah, so I think a lot of times as leaders, it's the same thing that we were just talking about. Yeah. So I think a lot of times we can, and I'm guilty of it, push things on people. Mm-hmm. Okay, here you go. Here's what I want you to do, and there's a place for that, right? I mean, I'm not saying that you can't ever ask somebody to do something. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you try to pull them along instead of push them into doing something. So that this whole dynamic, this whole way of leading is about pulling people, getting buy-in, clarifying, getting direction, getting commitment, getting accountability. You're pulling people along with you. And this isn't my own thing. You've heard this before. You can go fast, but you're going alone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so as you're leading people, you can go fast. You go really fast, but you're probably not pulling anybody else along with you. Yeah. They're probably dragging their heels. And so you have to really figure out, how can I pull Tom, Dick, or Harry, right, or Lucy, or how can I grab a hold of them and where they're at in their own journey and what their responsibilities are. How do I grab a hold of them and pull them along with me to this greater vision that they buy into? Mm-hmm. It's not just my vision. It's not just what I want to accomplish. It's what they want to accomplish as well, because they've been included in the process. Yeah.
So when you develop vision, is it something that can be done by the leader, and then you say to everyone else, here's our vision, you got to buy in? Or when people are really looking to develop their vision and who they are and why they do what they do, does it need to be done by the collective?
I think it does, but I'm learning.
Yeah, right.
I'm learning, and so that's what I want to have, that posture. Always want to have that posture as a leader. I want to be a learner. Mm-hmm. Not always execute very well, but I do really want to be a lead. I really do want to be a learner. So what, like at the bank, we do this. We were just doing this the last few weeks. So we're creating a vision, and so. Part of that is saying, okay, so here are the things that we're having to work with. Mm-hmm. Here's the collective things. So we made a list of everything. Right. And all the departments and what they're working on and what's happening, that's 3 or 4 or 5, 10 deep, there's 50 priorities.
Yeah.
Right? 50 priorities. Okay. So we divide them all up, and so then we say, okay, so what is our primary vision here at the bank? What is first? What is second? What is third? What are we really trying to do? Mm-hmm. And so we come up with that. We say, and that this is just discussion, right? In this management team.
Right.
This is just discussion, and we're working through all of this together. And I came up with a list of stuff before I started, but that's just to give us a place to start, right? It's not, I want to hear what you guys think. I want to hear okay, so then we come up with a direction. Well, a vision of what then that informs the other 50 things that are on the list in each department, right? Mm-hmm. So if we're actually saying, hey, this is the direction we're going, okay, now all of a sudden what maybe was number 10 on the list over here in this department all of a sudden becomes number 1. Mm. Because if we're gonna get this vision accomplished, all of a sudden that changes direction.
Yeah. I love it, and it takes a very intentional approach. Uh-huh. But there's no doubt about it. I think this has become second nature to you, and I want to talk to you a little bit. We're gonna finish on this. So I went around the bank, talked to a few people, and what I would describe is you have a very strong servant leadership quality to you, and one employee in particular said that you and I'm going to paraphrase her.
Okay.
What she said is you empower. You are an incredible listener. She feels listened to your point earlier in the podcast. You see people as people, right? As human beings. And you treat everyone with respect. And I think that's the ultimate compliment that a leader can get is the fact that, here's one employee who really is all those things you're talking about, all those things you're trying to implement from a leadership. It's being felt and seen on a very real and practical level by your employees.
Well,
so I want to congratulate you.
Very kind.
And Melanie,
her.
of course, was wonderful to talk to. And I hope she's okay with me sharing it. She said she was. I said I got to share this.
She's an incredible employee.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of them. But I think that really does pay you a tremendous compliment because I think it's become second nature. So at some point for every leader, with work and with time and with effort, it just becomes easier, doesn't it?
It does. It does because you have a frame of reference, that you're working from. And so it doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you always get it right. Doesn't mean that you don't face challenges and of all kinds. I think just owning your own dysfunction, owning your own, disabilities or shortcomings, maybe is a better word. Seeing those, allowing people to speak those into your lives, being vulnerable enough to say, hey, I understand I'm not perfect. I understand that I may not get this right. Yeah. And so if I don't, tell me, and sometimes that's hard, especially if you're the CEO, it's hard for them to actually do that. But it's something that I say to my employees, if I'm not doing this right, if I'm not walking my talk, so to speak, let me know. Yeah. Well, you definitely do that. There's no doubt about it. And we needed a lot more than an hour, Kevin. I mean, first off, we could have spent an hour just on your growing up in South America, which is fascinating in and of itself. But there's so much from that leadership in, too, that you are so well-versed in that we'll have to do this again. That'd be awesome. Yeah. I would love it. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you. You bet. Yeah, it's fun.